I stood at the edge of the forest, a vast expanse of green stretching before me. The morning mist clung to the mountain slopes, swirling between the ancient pines like a veil, the kind that seemed to hide more than it revealed. The landscape here was almost mythical, untouched, pristine, and full of secrets that nature had kept hidden for centuries. Yellowstone, a place I had always dreamed of capturing through my lens, had become a canvas of both beauty and something deeper, something darker. But this trip was different. This time it wasn't just about photographing the landscape, it was about finding the answers to a mystery that had been pulling at me for years. Bruce, my older brother, stood a few paces away adjusting his camera settings. He'd been the one to push for this trip. "We need something fresh," he'd said. "Something that hasn't been seen by 1,000 other photographers." So, we packed our gear, drove out to Yellowstone, and set out on what was supposed to be a simple nature photography expedition. But as we moved deeper into the park, the beauty of the place started to feel more like an illusion. The trees were taller here, older, their trunks twisted with the weight of years, but there was something about the silence, the way the forest felt, that unsettled me. There were no birds singing, no squirrels skittering through the underbrush. Only the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Bruce didn't seem to notice it. He was too focused on the perfect shot, his camera aimed at the dark outline of the mountains framed against the fog. "You know," I said, trying to shake off the unease I felt, "I always thought we'd find peace out here. But it feels like something's hiding in the trees just beyond the light." Bruce looked over his shoulder, his brow furrowing. "You always get weirded out when we're deep in the woods. It's just the fog, the isolation. That's what makes it interesting. We'll find some incredible shots today. Trust me." I didn't want to argue, not when we were both so excited to be here. After all, this was a place that had been on our photography bucket list for years. We were nature photographers, used to exploring the untouched corners of the world with our lenses. There was a kind of magic in capturing what few people ever saw, an untouched moment in time, frozen forever on film. But this time, I wasn't sure if the magic I was feeling was the good kind. Bruce took a few more shots of the fog rolling over the trees, and I adjusted my own camera to snap a few pictures of the towering pine trees, their long branches drooping with the weight of the mist. The atmosphere here was perfect for the kind of nature photos we loved. But there was something wrong, something off about this place that made me uneasy. It wasn't the fog or the thick, heavy trees. It was something deeper. Something that whispered just beyond the edges of my awareness. We walked deeper into the forest, our boots sinking into the thick moss beneath our feet. The air was damp, cold despite the early hour. Bruce led the way, always the more adventurous one, as I followed close behind, trying to keep up with his steady pace. "That's a good shot," I said, gesturing to a particularly impressive tree with moss hanging from its branches like a veil. Bruce was already framing it through his camera, adjusting the lens. But as he clicked the shutter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The trees around us seemed to be closing in, their branches so thick and heavy that they blocked out most of the light. The forest felt unnatural, too still. "Do you notice how quiet it is?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed the tension that had been building in my chest. Bruce looked up from his camera, frowning. "What do you mean?" "It's just fog, Andrew. It's supposed to be quiet." "No," I insisted. "It's more than that. It's like everything's holding its breath. Like the whole forest is waiting for something." He glanced around and gave a small shrug. "You're overthinking it. We're in the middle of nowhere, that's all. Nature's like that sometimes." But I wasn't convinced. The air felt thicker here, as if something was pressing down on us. The silence felt oppressive, like the forest was alive but watching us from the shadows, waiting for us to slip up. We pressed on, the quiet growing heavier with each step. The forest had changed, subtly at first. The trees were older, their bark darker, more twisted. We hadn't noticed it at first, but now that we were deep in, it was impossible to ignore. Some trees had scars, strange, deep gashes in their bark, like they had been clawed by something with unnatural force. The moss at their base was disturbed, as if something large had passed through recently. Bruce was still preoccupied with his camera, though. He didn't seem to notice. I squatted down by one of the trees, running my fingers through the moss. It was damp, cool to the touch, but something caught my eye. There, just beneath the surface, a small patch of dirt had been disturbed. It wasn't the usual layer of earth, but something darker. As I brushed away the moss, I could see it more clearly. A blackened stain, like something had been dragged across the forest floor. It was an animal, too large, too deliberate. "What do you think this is?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Bruce turned, his eyes scanning the ground. That's odd. But it could just be an animal. Some of the big bears around here get really territorial. Maybe it was marking its territory. I wasn't so sure. This didn't feel like something a bear would do. There was something wrong about it. Something far too deliberate. We decided to keep moving, but the deeper we went, the stranger things became. The trees seemed to grow closer together and the mist thickened. The silence stretched, broken only by the occasional creak of a branch or the whisper of wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Every time I looked over my shoulder, it felt like someone, or something, was watching us. But there was nothing there. Only trees, their black shapes looming against the gray sky. Finally, we reached a clearing and Bruce stopped, his camera dangling from his neck as he scanned the area. "This is perfect," he said, taking a few shots of the mist swirling around the trees. The light was just right, and for a moment, the strange sense of unease lifted. But then something caught my eye, something moving in the trees. It was quick, too quick for my mind to process, like a shadow passing in the corner of my vision. I blinked and looked again. Nothing. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice tight. Bruce lowered his camera. "See what?" "I swear I saw something, in the trees. Moving." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not starting to spook yourself, are you? It's just the fog messing with your eyes." I wanted to argue, but the doubt gnawed at me. Maybe it was just the fog. But then I heard it, a rustling far too loud to be the wind. It was almost like footsteps. I turned to Bruce, my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you hear that?" Bruce frowned, looking around. "All right, enough with the ghost stories. Let's just grab some shots and head back. It's getting late." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something about this place. It wasn't just the strange shapes of the trees or the odd silence. It was more. There was something about the way the forest seemed to shift, as if it was alive in a way that didn't belong. And we were walking right into its heart. The air was colder now, the kind of biting cold that settled deep into your bones. It wasn't yet evening, but the fog that had hung in the trees earlier had thickened, shrouding the mountain trail in an unsettling blanket of white. We were climbing the last stretch of the volcano now. My brother Bruce leading the way as always, his camera strapped to his side, an eager look on his face. The thrill of the climb kept us both going, pushing through the damp air, our boots crunching against the loose gravel and wet rocks beneath us. I could feel something in the atmosphere, a tension in the air that hadn't been there earlier. The silence, always heavy in these remote places, felt oppressive now. The mist clung to everything, swirling around the jagged rocks like it had a mind of its own. The further we went, the more the landscape seemed to warp, as if the land itself had begun to bend beneath the weight of time. But Bruce was oblivious to my unease. "This is the shot, Andrew," he said with a grin, pointing toward the crest of the mountain. "Look at that view. The way the fog wraps around the volcano's peak, it's perfect." I forced a smile and nodded, though my heart was already heavy with something I couldn't explain. Bruce was always the more daring one, the one who pushed me to take risks to get that one perfect shot. But today something felt wrong. I tried to shake it off. "We're almost there. Just a little further." The trail was getting steeper now, the rocks slick with moisture. Every step felt like it was taking more effort, the fog closing in around us. I could barely see Bruce ahead of me, but I could hear his voice, low and calm as he adjusted his camera settings, muttering something about the light. But then everything went wrong. I had taken a few more steps when I heard it, a scream, a horrible guttural cry that seemed to tear through the fog, echoing off the cliffs and straight into my chest. My heart stopped. The sound was Bruce, I knew it instantly. The terror in that scream, a mix of shock, pain, and pure fear, ripped through me like a cold knife. Without thinking, I sprinted toward the sound, my legs pushing harder than I ever had. The world around me was a blur, the fog thickening, making it harder to see. I called out to him, my voice shaking, but all I could hear was the wind and the screeching fog. Then I saw him. Bruce was already at the edge of the cliff, his arms flailing as he fought against the air, as if trying to grab hold of something invisible. His body lurched forward, and for a terrifying instant our eyes locked, his wide with terror, mine filled with helplessness. He mouthed something, but the words were lost in the howling wind. In the next moment, Bruce disappeared. The fog swallowed him whole. I froze. For a second, it felt like the entire world had gone still, like the forest and the mountain itself were holding their breath. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I stumbled forward, my hands reaching out desperately into the fog where he had fallen. But there was nothing, just the black emptiness beneath me. A horrible, gut-wrenching silence settled over the mountain, deeper and colder than the fog itself. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My brother was gone. I had just watched him fall, and the world felt as though it had tilted on its axis. I fell to my knees, staring into the abyss, but the fog was too thick, too impenetrable to see anything. The wind howled, mocking my grief with its wild, empty noise. I couldn't hear Bruce's scream anymore. It was as if it had been erased, lost to the mountain's hunger. "Bruce?" I screamed, my voice hoarse, cracking under the weight of everything. "Bruce?" But the only answer was the hollow echo of my own voice, lost in the fog. Panic took hold of me then, and I scrambled toward the edge, my hands shaking as I tried to find any trace of him. But there was nothing. No movement. No sign of my brother anywhere. The world seemed to mock me, the mountains and the mist taunting me with their silence. I had no choice. I had to go down there. I quickly scrambled to the side of the mountain, finding what little purchase I could on the rocks. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully made my way down, my hands and feet slipping on the wet stone. My mind raced, wondering what had happened, what I had seen. I couldn't fathom it. How had Bruce, so experienced, so sure of his steps, just vanished? There had been no warning, no misstep, no slip of the foot. One moment he was there, and the next, he was gone. As I descended, the fog grew thicker, the shadows darker. I kept hearing sounds, scraping noises, faint whispers, just at the edge of my hearing. I turned quickly, trying to focus, but there was nothing. Just the swirling mist. When I reached the base of the cliff, I found no sign of Bruce. No blood, no marks where he had fallen. It was as if the mountain had swallowed him whole, and yet, my heart refused to believe it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, searching the ground for any clue, anything that might explain what had just happened. But there was nothing. I sat back on a large rock, my hands pressed against my face, trying to steady my breathing. I thought of Bruce's face, that moment of terror before he fell. It wasn't an accident. Something had happened. Something had pulled him toward that cliff, had made him scream. It wasn't just the fog. It wasn't just the mountain. It was something else. I stayed there for hours, my mind spiraling into madness. The reality of it all, the strange feeling I'd had since we first arrived, the eerie silence of the forest, the growing unease I couldn't shake, finally collided with the truth. This wasn't an accident. Bruce's death, it was part of something bigger. Something far more sinister. The forest, the mountain, they were alive. And they were hungry. I don't know how much time passed before I dragged myself back to the ranger station. The mountain had taken Bruce, had swallowed him whole, and no matter how many times I retraced my steps or screamed his name, the only answer I received was the echo of the wind. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. But one thing I knew for certain was that I wasn't leaving the mountain without answers. It was around 4 a.m. when I reached the station, a thin stream of light breaking through the dense forest canopy above. The rain had started again, cold and relentless, as though the sky itself mourned with me. I forced myself inside and slammed the door behind me, the sound of the rain pounding on the roof almost drowning out the rush of blood in my ears. For a long time I stood there, staring at the maps pinned to the wall, my mind spinning. I had to understand what had happened. Why did Bruce fall? What had I missed? My brother had died before my eyes, and the only thing I was certain of was that something on this mountain had done it. I needed to investigate. I shook off the exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin and began to gather the tools I'd need. My camera sat at the corner of my desk, its lens scratched and dented from the falls I'd taken in the last few hours. It should have been with Bruce. I should have been taking the photos with him, capturing the haunting beauty of this volcano, but instead, my brother's camera was buried under layers of dirt somewhere on that mountainside. I grabbed my gear, careful this time. A flashlight, compass, field notebook, a small survival kit, and, of course, my camera. My mind flitted briefly to the idea of contacting the authorities, getting search and rescue teams involved, but I quickly dismissed it. They would only look for Bruce's body. They would only see the fall, the accident. But I knew better now. This wasn't an accident. Something had lured him. Something had led him to that edge, and now it was waiting for me. The first place I needed to investigate was the volcano's base, the forest surrounding it. I needed to look at the changes in the wildlife behavior I had noticed earlier. The animals had been acting strange since we arrived. Not just the animals, but the land itself. The trees, they had this stillness to them. This waiting. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't about to leave without knowing what it was. The climb back up the mountain felt different this time. Every step seemed heavier, like the forest was reaching out to me, pulling me deeper into its mysteries. The fog rolled in quicker now, thicker than before, as if the mountain was trying to hide its secrets from me. My boots crunched in the wet underbrush, but this time the forest felt like it was alive, more than just a stretch of land. It felt like something watched me. I reached the trail where Bruce had fallen, my heart pounding with each step, a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. The rocks were slick with rain, and the mist had wrapped itself around the trees like a blanket. But it wasn't just the weather that made the place feel wrong. Something in the air had shifted. The silence, it was unnatural. The usual chirp of birds, the rustle of small animals moving through the brush, gone. The forest felt like a hollow space, empty of life. It was just me now, wandering the trail, trying to piece together what had happened. But with each passing minute, the sense of wrongness only deepened. I knelt down at the spot where Bruce had stood, staring at the jagged cliff edge. There was nothing here that explained why he had screamed, why he had fallen. No loose rocks, no sign of a struggle. Nothing. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, yet it seemed to give way to something deeper. Something I couldn't explain. A rustle came from the trees behind me, a sharp sound that broke the stillness. I whipped around, my heart racing in my chest. The wind was picking up, pushing the fog further into the valley, but there was no movement in the trees. No animals. No wind stirring the branches. Just the oppressive silence. I stepped closer to the edge of the cliff, peering down, trying to force myself to look where Bruce had fallen. But the fog seemed to twist there, clouding my vision, hiding the drop. My hands trembled, the memory of his face, his scream, the way his body had vanished into nothingness, still fresh in my mind. But there was nothing there now. No body. No traces. Not even the sound of the wind. Just the lingering sense of something waiting. Watching. I pulled away from the edge, my chest tight, and started to walk down the path where we had hiked earlier. There had to be something, anything, that would help me understand what had happened. Bruce wouldn't just fall. I had to believe that. It was then that I noticed the first sign. A patch of ground near the base of the volcano, where the forest seemed unnaturally bare. There was no undergrowth here. No ferns, no moss, no small plants growing between the rocks. Just a carpet of dark, almost black soil that felt wrong underfoot. I crouched down and scooped up a handful, the texture strange, gritty like ash, but with an oily sheen. I sniffed it, but it didn't smell like ash. It had no scent at all. I knew I was onto something. I took out my camera and snapped a few photos of the ground, then pulled out my field notebook. I jotted down my observations quickly. Strange soil, devoid of plant life. Ash-like but oily. No scent. No animals around. I stood up, scanning the area again. The sense of wrongness was suffocating. I needed to find more. I needed to see everything. I forced myself to keep moving. By the time I reached the old-growth forest near the foot of the volcano, the fog had thickened again. It felt like I was walking through a dream, every step muffled by the dense mist. The air was colder here, colder than it had been higher up. I could hear the faintest sounds of animals in the distance, scratching, scraping. But the creatures weren't making any noise. They were hiding, moving in ways that were unnatural. I could feel their eyes on me, but whenever I tried to spot them, they vanished into the trees. I found more signs of strange behavior, piles of disturbed earth, large paw prints that seemed too deep, too fresh for the area. I snapped pictures of them, documenting everything. And then, I heard it. A low growl. A rumble deep within the fog like a warning. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was so quiet, I wasn't sure I had heard it at all. But then again the growl came louder this time, more distinct. It was low, primal, the kind of sound an animal would make when it felt threatened. But it was wrong. It didn't belong here. I took a step back, but before I could react, I saw movement, a flicker of something dark in the fog. Something large, too large to be a normal forest creature. It moved so quickly, disappearing into the mist, its shape just out of focus. But the unease that gripped my chest was undeniable. The forest was hiding something. Something dangerous. I made my way back to the station, my hands shaking as I recounted everything I had found. There were no animals where there should have been. No tracks. Just strange patches of earth and signs of unnatural movement. The air was wrong. The trees were wrong. And the mountain itself, felt wrong. Bruce had fallen, and I had no doubt in my mind that something had made him fall. Something had pulled him toward that edge. And now it was coming for me. I didn't tell anyone about the growl, or the creatures I thought I'd glimpsed in the fog. I didn't mention the unnatural silence of the forest or the strange soil I'd found. Not yet. But I knew now. The disappearances, the strange events, the eerie happenings, it wasn't just coincidence. There was something alive on this mountain. Something older than the trees, something that didn't want to be found. And whatever it was starting to get hungry. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain was closing in on me. With each step I took, I felt it watching, pressing down on me like the weight of the whole forest itself. The fog hadn't lifted since the night Bruce fell, and the trees seemed to bend under its suffocating grip. I thought about turning back, about giving up on my investigation, but the thought of Bruce, his face twisted in horror as he fell, kept me going. I had to know what had killed him. I started my day earlier than usual, the sun barely breaking through the mist. The radio crackled and I heard the familiar voice of Pete, the dispatcher from the station. "You okay, Andrew?" I swallowed hard, gripping the radio with sweaty palms. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just looking into something. I'll be back later." I turned off the radio, cutting off the only tether I had left to the outside world. The station had been too quiet since Bruce's disappearance. I couldn't afford distractions. Not now. The trail I had been following, once a place of calm, peaceful hikes, felt different. The deeper I went into the wilderness, the more the world around me seemed to distort, as if the trees themselves were pulling away from me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I half expected to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows of the trunks. But no one was there. The silence had grown heavier, more oppressive, as if even the birds and animals knew better than to disturb whatever was lurking on the edge of the forest. It was at the base of the volcano where the air started to change. The earth felt wrong beneath my feet, soft and spongy in places like walking over a thick carpet that didn't belong. My boots sunk into the ground more than they should have, and each step left a shallow imprint that quickly filled with dark, oily water. It was as if the land itself was alive, pulsing with something unseen beneath its surface. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I scooped some of the strange liquid into a small container. The color was wrong, darker than any mud I'd ever seen, thick and viscous like tar. It didn't feel like rainwater or any natural substance. It felt unnatural, like something that didn't belong in the world. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I quickly stuffed the container into my pack. A sudden movement in the trees snapped my attention back to the shadows. Something large moved between the trunks, its shape indistinct in the mist. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to make a move. The forest had gone eerily still again, the unnatural quiet pressing in on me. I stepped back slowly, my eyes fixed on the dark outline ahead. The last time I had felt this watched, Bruce had fallen. I wasn't going to make the same mistake again. I moved quickly, picking up the pace as I headed deeper into the mountain's forest, ignoring the eerie sounds that echoed from all directions. The air grew colder and the mist became thicker, swirling around me like fingers reaching for my legs. I felt like I was walking through a living nightmare, where nothing was as it seemed. I had no choice but to push forward. I had to get to the heart of this, even if it meant confronting whatever was waiting for me. It was when I reached the old-growth forest again that the air felt wrong, and I don't mean the usual chill or fog. This felt like the forest itself was moving, breathing, shifting in ways it shouldn't. The trees, ancient and towering, felt closer now, as if they were crowding in, narrowing the path ahead. The sense of something lurking, watching, was unbearable. The sense of dread that had clung to me since I found Bruce's camera only grew stronger here. Every step I took, I felt eyes on me. And not just from the shadows, but from everywhere. It was as if the trees were not just trees but ancient witnesses, their twisted, gnarled forms hunched in wait. The rocks, slick with moss, looked like they had been waiting for something, or someone, to slip. A low growl echoed from behind, sending a sharp tremor down my spine. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was too guttural, too animalistic, yet it resonated deep inside me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hands. But the beam only illuminated the thick fog, the trees that seemed to close in on me more tightly. No sign of movement. No predator in sight. The growl had been real. It was out there. But it was waiting. I started moving faster, my heart thudding in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to run. But something kept pulling me forward. Maybe it was the investigation. Maybe it was the need to know. But deep down, I knew what I was walking toward wasn't just a mystery. It was something far more terrifying. I came across another disturbed patch of earth. But this one was different. This time there were fresh footprints. Large ones. Too large. And they weren't just in the dirt, they were in the soil itself, as though something had sunk deep into the earth. The prints were heavy, almost too deep to be real. But there they were, as if they had been left just moments ago. My stomach churned. I crouched down again, my flashlight shaking in my hands. These weren't animal tracks. Not anything I recognized. The shape was wrong. They were almost human, but the toes were too long, too clawed. And there was something almost wrong about the way they sunk into the earth. I stood, heart hammering in my chest. Something wasn't right here. Suddenly, I heard it again, the growl much louder this time. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was all around me. My breath hitched and I turned to face the direction the noise had come from. But all I saw was more fog, more trees, more silence. I was losing my mind. Then something moved. A shape, darker than the mist surrounding it, flickered in the trees. But before I could react, it was gone, swallowed up by the thick fog once more. My hands gripped the flashlight harder, my fingers aching. The air grew colder, suffocating in its thickness. I turned to leave, but the path behind me was gone. The trail I had followed, the one that led to the base of the volcano, was no longer visible. The trees had closed in behind me like a wall. The only way out was forward. I kept walking. Minutes or hours passed. I couldn't tell. The fog twisted and wavered around me as if the forest itself was breathing, pulling me deeper into its clutches. And then I saw it. A figure. I froze in place. It stood perfectly still, cloaked in shadow, its features hidden in the mist. But there was something about it. Something that made my stomach turn. The way it stood, the way it watched. I couldn't see its face, but I felt it. I felt it staring at me, its gaze burning into my skin. I didn't move. I couldn't. The moment I did, it would know. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. It was watching me, waiting. The growl rumbled again, closer this time, from somewhere just beyond the figure. The fog thickened, swirling faster, the forest closing in tighter around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was keep my eyes fixed on that shadow, that thing I couldn't fully see. And I realized with a sickening certainty that whatever it wasn't waiting for me to leave. It was waiting for me to come closer. My heart hammered in my chest. The growl came again, louder now, more distinct, more intelligent. This wasn't a predator. This wasn't an animal. This was something older. Something darker. Something that had been waiting a long time. I turned and ran. The forest seemed to shift around me, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I stumbled, falling, scraping my palms against the wet, cold ground. The fog was closing in, blurring everything around me. I could hear the growl now, pacing behind me, moving just as fast, just as close. I didn't dare look back. I was running from something ancient. Something that had been here long before I had ever stepped foot on this cursed land. And I was only beginning to understand how far it would go to keep its secrets. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The image of that figure watching me from the trees wouldn't leave my mind. It had been too still, too patient, like it knew I'd be stupid enough to keep walking straight into its trap. The sun hadn't fully risen, but I was already out, moving deeper into the mountain's forest. The air was thick, suffocating with the weight of unspoken things. There was no sound. The birds had stopped calling, and the trees, those ancient, gnarled things, seemed to be whispering to each other in a language I didn't want to understand. I was getting closer now. The area where Bruce had fallen. The place I knew I'd find more answers. Answers I was almost afraid to uncover. I took the path through the dense undergrowth, avoiding the areas where I'd seen those strange tracks. They seemed to lead off in random directions, fading into the trees as if they were leading me away from something, trying to force me off the path. But there was no turning back. Not now. My fingers brushed against the damp moss on the trees as I moved forward, the wetness sinking deep into my skin. I had the uneasy feeling I was being watched, the same chill creeping over my spine that had come over me when I first saw the shadows moving through the trees. But I pushed that thought away. I had to stay focused. I had to find the truth. As I reached the edge of the cliff where Bruce had fallen, I felt my stomach tighten. The same sickening sense of dread settled over me, thick and suffocating. The ground beneath me felt unstable, as if it too knew what had happened here. I scanned the area carefully, looking for any sign of Bruce, anything that would tell me what had really happened that day. That's when I saw it. Half buried beneath a pile of wet, rotting leaves, the frayed end of a rope caught my eye. My breath caught in my throat. It was the rope I'd seen Bruce use when we'd been hiking together, his climbing rope, thick, sturdy, but clearly worn with use. I bent down, feeling a cold rush of dread coil around my chest. The rope was severed, the cut jagged, not made by any blade. The fibers were frayed as if it had been torn apart, something far stronger than the typical wear of use ripping it asunder. There was no question now. Bruce hadn't fallen. He had been pulled. I reached out with trembling hands, touching the severed rope. It felt wrong, the fibers too smooth, almost unnatural. A chill raced up my spine and I stood up quickly, scanning the trees around me. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, louder than the wind. That's when I saw the marks. They were faint at first, barely noticeable in the thick undergrowth. But as I moved forward, they became clearer. Impressions in the earth, like large, clawed feet had pressed into the ground. The tracks weren't from any animal I knew. They were too deep, too wide. And they were fresh. I moved cautiously, following the trail. The trees seemed to close in on me again, their branches heavy with mist, their gnarled shapes twisting like dark hands in the fog. The closer I got, the more unnatural the forest became. The scent in the air had shifted too. There was something acrid, like something rotting. Then the air grew still. I stopped dead in my tracks. The growl. It was so close now, vibrating the air around me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I instinctively gripped my rifle tighter, my knuckles white. I couldn't move. My body froze. And then, from somewhere ahead of me, came the sound of something heavy dragging itself through the undergrowth. It wasn't the rustling of leaves or the scampering of small creatures. This was something large, something moving with a slow, deliberate pace. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The growl came again, more distinct this time, not animal, too intelligent, too deliberate. It was almost a low, guttural hum that vibrated deep inside my bones, like it was reaching into me, pulling at something primal. The tracks led me to a small clearing. At first, I didn't see anything. The fog was thicker here, clinging to the ground like a heavy blanket, and the trees seemed to form a perfect circle, their trunks tightly packed together. That's when I noticed the ground. It was soft, too soft, like it had been disturbed, dug up, scratched at. A large patch of earth had been ripped apart, leaving a jagged, almost circular hole in the center of the clearing. It wasn't deep, maybe only a few feet down, but it was unnaturally clean. The edges of the hole were sharp, as if they'd been cut with something precise, something sharp. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me as I approached the hole. It was too perfect, too deliberate. As I crouched down to get a closer look, I saw something glinting in the dirt. It was a piece of metal, partially buried. My heart leapt in my chest as I pulled it free from the earth. It was a fragment of a compass, the same kind Bruce always carried with him. The compass was broken, the needle snapped in half. But it was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. Bruce had been here. Something had dragged him here. I took a step back, my mind racing. I didn't understand what was happening. What kind of creature could create something like this? What was it that had killed Bruce, and why hadn't I heard about it in the news? Suddenly, there was a rustling behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. There was nothing there, just the mist swirling, closing in on me. But I knew something was watching. I could feel it. It was there, just out of my sight. I had to leave. I couldn't stay any longer. I had to get back to the station, get help, report what I had found. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. At the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the fog, stood a figure. A tall, thin shape with long limbs that stretched unnaturally high, its head twisted to the side as it watched me. It was human, but not. Its face was distorted, hollow. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were too wide, too black. They stared at me, unblinking, hollow, like there was nothing inside them. Just endless darkness. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then it smiled. The smile was wide, too wide for a human mouth, stretching up into the thing's skull. It wasn't a smile of joy or mirth. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before it strikes. And then, with a screech that sounded like bones scraping against stone, it disappeared back into the fog. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, my body frozen with fear. The growl came again from all directions now, and I knew it wasn't just one thing out there. It was a horde. I didn't hesitate. I ran, faster than I'd ever run before, as the forest closed in behind me. The trail I had followed was gone. The trees blurred, their shapes distorting as I sprinted through them, the fog making everything feel like a twisted nightmare. I had no idea what I had just witnessed, but I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The forest felt wrong now, as if it were alive, shifting, breathing, watching. The trees loomed over me like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching down as if they wanted to grab hold. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was always just out of view, lurking in the fog, waiting for me to make a mistake. I had left the clearing behind, but it was impossible to leave the memory of that creature, that grotesque face, behind. The twisted smile. The hollow eyes. It was still fresh in my mind, like a stain that wouldn't wash out. What was it? What kind of creature could do that? As I walked through the dense underbrush, my breath shallow, I focused on keeping my footsteps steady. My rifle was slung across my back, but it felt useless. The forest was closing in like it was trying to swallow me whole. Every crack of a twig underfoot made me jump, every rustle in the trees felt too deliberate. I was being hunted. But by what? I had to keep moving to get answers. Bruce had been here. He had seen something that had killed him. I needed to know what it was, why it wanted us. Why it had come for him, for me, for all those who had disappeared before. It wasn't long before I found them. At first, I thought it was just more signs of the strange creatures I had been tracking. The claw marks, the unnaturally deep imprints in the earth. But as I got closer, I realized the truth. The ground had been torn apart, but not by some animal. This was something far worse. Something that fed on death. I crouched, heart hammering, as I saw the remnants of a campsite. It was barely visible beneath the overgrown vines and moss, hidden in the deep shadows of the trees. But as I stepped closer, the stench hit me, the sharp, acrid odor of decay, mixed with something far worse. It was human. I felt my stomach twist as I knelt beside the remains. There, half buried in the dirt, was the shredded remains of a sleeping bag, torn beyond recognition. Ripped flesh and bone, littered across the ground. I swallowed hard, trying to hold down the bile rising in my throat. The human remains were barely recognizable, but the wounds, God, the wounds. They were too clean, too precise, as though the body had been torn apart by something with too many hands, too many fingers. And then I saw it. The thing that was left behind. A patch of skin, half pulled from the bones, still twitching faintly as if it were trying to heal itself. I leaned in closer, and the air around me grew colder, the world around me narrowing to the grotesque scene in front of me. The skin was shifting, changing, as though it were trying to mend itself, wrapping around the bones, thickening, filling out. But it wasn't healing. It was turning into something else. The skin wasn't human anymore. It was growing. I stumbled back, my hand over my mouth, trying to steady myself as the horror sunk in. The thing feeding on this body wasn't just consuming flesh, it was absorbing it, taking what it needed to transform, to become stronger, to look more like us. I backed away, my mind screaming for me to run, but my body was frozen. The air felt thick, like the trees themselves were closing in on me. There was something else here, something watching. I was not alone. The growl came again. But this time it wasn't just a warning. It was a call. I wasn't the only one in the forest now. I grabbed my rifle and started moving. I had to leave, had to get back to where there was light, where I wasn't completely alone. I had no choice but to follow the path back to the camp, where I had set up the last night, praying I wouldn't find anything worse. But the deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. The trees were becoming twisted, their limbs bent, like they were pushing in on me, closing me off from every direction. Then I saw the first one. It was hunched over in the distance, just barely visible behind a thick veil of fog. It moved slowly, almost casually, dragging itself along the ground with unnerving ease. The skin was too stretched over its bones, like it was too thin, like there was nothing human left underneath. Its eyes were wide, wide enough to swallow the entire forest, and they were fixed on me. I could feel it even though I couldn't see its face clearly. But it didn't matter. I could feel its hunger. Then I heard the whispering. It wasn't like the growls or the calls I'd heard before. This was something other. The wind wasn't blowing, but the words slipped through the fog, wrapping around my mind like a tight noose. Come closer. We're waiting for you. The air grew colder and I felt a prickle at the back of my neck. My heart raced. No, it couldn't be real. I had to get out. I ran. Branches slapped against my face, scratching at my skin as I sprinted through the underbrush. My breath was ragged in my chest, each step carrying me farther from the creatures, but they were closer now, so much closer. I heard them behind me. Their footsteps, dragging like something far too heavy for their own bodies. I couldn't keep running forever. I had to face whatever this was. I turned, and there they were. Two of them. The one I had seen earlier, hunched over, its eyes impossibly wide, and beside it, something bigger, larger than any human could be. It stood tall, towering over the trees, its face nothing but a mass of jagged teeth, its skin a patchwork of blackened flesh. The thing's mouth opened, wide enough to swallow me whole, and I could see the other one moving to my left, creeping closer, its long arms reaching out like they were made to grab, to snatch. I took aim, and fired. The shot echoed through the trees, but it didn't stop them. The creature's head snapped to the side, but it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it growled louder, and with a sudden jolt, its skin seemed to shift, the wound from the bullet closing over instantly, leaving nothing but dark, oily flesh where the hole had been. I couldn't breathe. I was out of time. With a scream, I turned and bolted, my legs moving faster than they ever had before. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I could still hear them, feel them behind me, their presence pressing in on me like the trees themselves were hunting me down. They were stronger now. Stronger than I'd ever imagined. And they were coming for me. The forest had swallowed me whole. I could feel it closing in on me from all sides, its shadows stretching out like tendrils, pulling me deeper into the suffocating embrace of the unknown. The creatures were still out there, close, too close, and I could hear them moving, rustling through the underbrush, their every step calculated, deliberate. I couldn't breathe. Every breath felt like it was made of the same stale air that had seeped into the forest floor, a thick, suffocating fog that clung to my lungs and made my chest tight. My pulse was racing, my hands trembling as I clutched the rifle tightly, its weight offering no comfort in this oppressive silence. It had been hours since I had left the camp, and yet the forest still felt impossibly vast, like I was lost in a labyrinth of trees, each one a sentinel watching my every move. I had to find shelter. I had to get away. But every time I tried to find a path, the trees seemed to shift, to close in on me. I was surrounded. And then I heard it. Andrew. The voice was faint at first, a whisper in the wind. It was a sound I knew too well. I stopped dead in my tracks, heart slamming in my chest. Andrew, the voice repeated, louder this time, but still soft, like it was being carried by the wind, like it was brushing up against my ear. It was Bruce's voice. I swallowed hard, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. It couldn't be. Bruce was dead. I had seen it with my own eyes. His body, broken and twisted at the base of that cliff, gone forever. This was impossible. And yet, there it was again. Andrew, it's me. I'm here. You have to find me. I gripped my rifle tighter, my knuckles turning white. My mind raced as I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination. Maybe exhaustion was messing with my senses, pushing me to hear things that weren't there. But deep down, something gnawed at me, something told me this was different. The voice didn't sound right. I took a step forward, moving slowly, cautiously. The voice was coming from deeper within the woods. It called to me again, but this time, there was a sense of urgency in its tone. Please, Andrew. Please, I'm scared. You have to help me. I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I knew something was wrong. Bruce would never sound like this. He was never the kind of person to beg, to sound so weak. I couldn't ignore it though. I had to know. I had to see. I pushed through the underbrush, my boots crunching loudly against the forest floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. The voice grew louder, closer, more desperate, until I was sure I was on the verge of finding him, of seeing my brother alive again. Then the voice stopped. It was gone, replaced by a low, guttural growl that echoed through the trees. My heart skipped a beat. The ground beneath me trembled, just slightly, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I looked around, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I tried to steady myself. Bruce? I called, my voice hoarse. No answer. I stepped forward, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a figure just beyond the trees moving slowly toward me. It was tall, too tall, its silhouette a twisted, unnatural thing. The shape of its limbs was wrong, too gangly, and its movements were jerky, like it wasn't used to the body it was inhabiting. I froze. Bruce? I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure paused, its head snapping to the side with an unnatural jerk. It was watching me, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw Bruce's face. His eyes wide, his lips trembling, his expression one of desperate need. But then the figure stepped into the light and I saw it for what it truly was. It wasn't Bruce. Not even close. The face was wrong, too wide, too stretched, like it had been molded from something grotesque. The eyes were too dark, too empty. They weren't Bruce's eyes. And when it opened its mouth, the teeth were sharp, too many, jagged like a predator's. But it was the voice that gave it away. It tried to speak in Bruce's voice, but there was something off, something distorted about it. It was like hearing a person speak underwater, the words muffled, distorted, but still trying to sound familiar. Andrew, it croaked, its voice breaking, as though it were trying to hold on to some semblance of humanity. I'm so sorry. Please. I could feel the bile rise in my throat as I took a step back. It wasn't Bruce. It was one of them. The mimics. I knew then that I had been right all along. These things weren't just monsters that lurked in the shadows. They had a purpose. They were feeding. They were taking something from us. Something deep, something primal. Memories. Souls. They mimicked us, took our form, our voices, twisted them until they were nothing but grotesque parodies of the people we loved. Bruce, I said again, this time louder, my voice cracking under the weight of my fear. What did they do to you? The creature. It tilted its head, its movements more deliberate now, as though it were studying me. Its lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't Bruce's smile. It was something else, something that didn't belong. I'm here, it said again, its voice now unmistakably alien, warped beyond recognition. I never left. I'm always here. I turned and ran. The mimic's laughter followed me, echoing through the forest, its voice stretching and warping until I couldn't tell if it was Bruce or something much worse, much older, laughing at my fear. I pushed through the trees, stumbling over rocks and roots, desperate to get away. But I could hear it following, its heavy footsteps growing closer, the sound of its voice twisting in the air, growing louder with every step. "Come back, Andrew. It's not over. I'm here." I broke through the trees into an open patch of land, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the mimic didn't follow me. It stopped at the edge, its shadow stretching toward me like a black cloud. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had to get out. I had to survive. But I knew then they were everywhere. Watching. Waiting. Mimicking us, our voices, our loved ones. They were never far behind. And if I didn't find a way to stop them, they would become us. And they would never stop hunting. The forest had become a living nightmare, an endless maze of shadows and whispers. Every crack in the branches, every rustle of the leaves, was a promise of something waiting, something watching. I stumbled through the underbrush, my feet aching, my body drenched in sweat, but my mind wasn't focused on the pain. It was consumed by the mimics. The way they moved, the way they spoke, the way they took everything from you. The feeling that Bruce was still out there, somewhere just beyond the trees, mimicking his voice, pretending to be him, was enough to push me over the edge. I could feel my grip on reality slipping with every step I took, the boundaries between what was real and what wasn't becoming more and more blurred. I couldn't trust anything anymore. The voice, Bruce's voice, kept calling to me, drifting through the trees, carrying with it an unbearable weight of guilt and fear. "Andrew, Andrew, it's me, you have to save me." It was coming from all directions, from behind me, from ahead, from the trees around me. I couldn't escape it. My heart raced in my chest, pounding against my ribs as I broke into a run, my legs like lead. But the harder I ran, the closer the voice became. It was everywhere. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. It didn't matter how far I ran. The forest closed in on me, the trees growing thicker, their branches clawing at my face, pulling at my clothes. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed my voice. "Andrew, you can't escape me. I'm still here. I'm still here with you." I wanted to scream. I needed to scream, but my throat was raw, my voice hoarse from hours of frantic running. The trees around me bent and twisted, their shadows stretching like fingers, reaching out for me. My breath came in jagged gasps as I tripped over roots, the earth beneath my feet sinking into a thick, wet moss that clung to my shoes. Then the voice stopped. The sudden silence felt like a cold hand on my back, its fingers pressing into my skin, sending a wave of nausea over me. I stopped, breathless, waiting for the sound to return, but it didn't. For a moment I thought I was free. But the air around me felt wrong. The forest was too still, too quiet. And then, from behind, I heard it again. "Andrew?" My blood ran cold. I turned around, slowly, my heart skipping a beat as I saw the figure emerge from the shadows of the trees. It wasn't Bruce. It was one of them. The mimics. The thing that looked like Bruce stood there, its face contorted into a grotesque imitation of my brother's, its eyes wide and desperate, but empty. The way it moved was wrong, jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. The thing smiled, its lips pulling back into a grin that was too wide, too sharp, its teeth glinting in the dim light. "Why are you running, Andrew?" it asked, its voice like my brother's, but twisted, distorted. "I'm not going to hurt you. You can trust me. I'm your brother. You need to trust me." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body froze, my mind caught in the horrible trap of its voice, its presence. I knew it wasn't Bruce, but something in me, something primal, something buried deep, kept telling me that this was my brother. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't run. I had no escape. "Come here," the creature whispered, its voice soft and coaxing, just like Bruce's had been when he was alive. "I need you. You can help me. You're the only one who can." I felt my sanity slipping away as the thing's voice wrapped around me like a noose, tightening with every word. The edges of my vision blurred, and for a moment I saw flashes of memories, my childhood, moments with Bruce, the adventures we'd had, the times we laughed. But the laughter faded. All of it faded. And in its place, I heard the thing's voice again, calling me forward, pulling me deeper into the woods. "Please," it begged. "Please, Andrew, come to me. I need you to help me. I'm so alone. I'm so scared." My knees buckled, my body collapsing to the ground. My head was spinning. I could feel my mind unraveling, piece by piece. "Help me, Andrew," The voice whispered again, this time almost a plea, so raw, so desperate. "I'm waiting. Please. You're the only one who can end this." I reached for the rifle at my side, my fingers trembling as I wrapped them around the cold metal. But I couldn't bring myself to lift it, to aim it. My hands felt like they were moving through molasses, heavy, sluggish, as if the forest itself was dragging me down. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the creature disappeared back into the shadows, leaving nothing behind but the hollow echo of its voice. I sat there in the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath ragged and uneven. Was it gone? I didn't know. I didn't know what was real anymore. I stood, my legs shaky, barely able to hold my weight. My mind was a maze of confusion and terror, the memories of Bruce, the voice of the mimic, everything crashing together until I couldn't separate what was real and what wasn't. The world felt like it was breaking apart, its edges fraying, and all I could do was hold on. And then, just when I thought I might snap completely, I heard it again, another voice. But this one wasn't Bruce's. It was my own. "Andrew, help me." It was a whisper. So soft I almost didn't hear it. But then it came again, louder. "Andrew, it's me. I need you." My blood ran cold. I was hearing my own voice, and I wasn't sure if it was the mimic, or if it was my mind breaking under the pressure. Either way, I had to keep moving. I had to keep running. But there was nowhere to run. There was nowhere safe. The mimics were everywhere. They were in the trees. They were in my mind. And I was losing myself in the process. I had found something, proof. Something that could finally show the world the horrors that had been creeping beneath the surface of Olympic National Park for years. Something that could explain Bruce's death and the disappearances. But as I stared at the photos on my camera screen, the deep sense of dread didn't dissipate. In fact, it only grew. The night had been long, colder than usual, and the air felt thick with anticipation. I had wandered deeper into the woods, driven by an unexplainable compulsion. Something had changed in me since Bruce died, something deep inside. I had stopped being afraid of the mimics, or at least I thought I had. But in reality, I had only grown numb to the fear. Maybe that was worse. I hadn't seen any of them for a few days, but I could still feel their presence in the woods. A constant, creeping pressure on the edges of my mind, as if they were watching me, waiting for the right moment to show themselves again. That night, though, the forest was quiet. So empty. A silence that felt unnatural. I knew they were here. I knew they had always been here, waiting, lurking, feeding on the fear they created. I had been taking pictures, almost on autopilot, as I walked through the same trail where Bruce had died, the same path that led to the edge of the cliff where he had fallen. But this time, something was different. I snapped a picture, and as I glanced at the viewfinder, my heart skipped a beat. The shadows around me had changed. No longer were the trees their familiar, towering silhouettes against the fading light. Instead, they seemed distorted, twisted, as if the very landscape was alive, shifting, breathing. I quickly checked the other shots, each one more horrifying than the last. The trees weren't just shadows anymore. They were something else, something wrong. Then I saw it. In one of the frames, at the very edge of the forest, barely visible through the tangled undergrowth, I caught a glimpse of something moving. A figure. But it wasn't human. I zoomed in on the image, my hands trembling as the reality of what I was looking at settled in. There was a face, but it wasn't the face of a person. It was twisted, deformed, like something trying to imitate humanity but failing horribly. The eyes were too big, the mouth stretched too wide, filled with sharp teeth that glistened in the fading light. It was one of the mimics. My stomach churned as I flicked through more photos, each one capturing more of the creatures. Their forms crouching behind trees, peeking from behind rocks, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. And then, the final one. A photo of a figure standing at the edge of a ravine, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its fingers twitching as if it were ready to move toward me. The most horrifying part was the shadow it cast. It was wrong. It didn't move like a normal shadow. It was alive, writhing in the dim light. I had the evidence. I had what I needed to expose them. But there was one thing I hadn't anticipated. I had expected the park rangers, maybe even a few locals, to dismiss me, to laugh at me. But what happened next? I couldn't have prepared for. I sent the photos to every major news outlet I could think of, hoping that someone would believe me. It had taken all my strength to even consider sharing them. Every part of me wanted to burn the evidence and forget it all. But the logical side of me knew I couldn't. I had to warn the world. I had to show people the truth. At first, the responses were slow. But then they started coming in. At first, the emails were polite, asking for more information, for clarification. Then I started hearing something far more ominous. "Sorry, Mr. Wheeler, we can't publish your photos. There's no credible source to verify these claims." Another email, a different outlet. "The photos you've submitted seem to be altered. Can you provide clearer images, preferably without the weird distortions?" The third email hit hardest. "Mr. Wheeler, after review, we believe your images may have been digitally manipulated. We strongly suggest you reconsider your approach. This kind of content is not suitable for our audience." I stared at the words on the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. They were dismissing me. They were calling me a liar. I sat there in my cabin, the weight of their disbelief crashing down on me. I could feel the presence of the mimics watching from outside, their voices buzzing in my ears. I could hear them whispering, taunting me. "You can't prove it, Andrew. No one will believe you." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until it hurt. How could they do this to me? How could they ignore the evidence? I had proof. The world needed to know what was happening, what was out there in the forest. I picked up my camera again, staring at the photos. They had to be real. I had to be right. But no one believed me. I clicked through the pictures again, this time with a sinking feeling in my gut. As I zoomed in on the figures in the forest, something started to shift in the images. The distortion, the strange shadows, the unnatural movements, they were all there. But I hadn't noticed before. Something was off about the photos. The angles were wrong. The lighting didn't match. The trees, they didn't look like they were really there, even though they had been in the shot when I took it. I blinked. No, this wasn't right. I looked again, closer. Someone, was in the shadows behind the trees. A face half hidden, watching me through the lens. I felt my blood turn to ice as the realization hit me. The mimics had been following me. They had been watching me this entire time. I had been tricked. And now I was part of the trap. I stumbled back, dropping my camera, feeling the ground beneath me shift. The air thickened with something darker. The shadows seemed to stretch, moving on their own, closing in around me. I knew they weren't going to stop. They would never stop. They had found me and now they had me. And I was the last one left to carry the story. I had reached the summit. The air was thin, biting, and the ground beneath me trembled slightly, like the heartbeat of something ancient, something monstrous. The volcano loomed in front of me, dark smoke swirling in the sky as if it too were aware of the danger that was brewing below. The forest, once a place of solitude and peace, now felt like a trap. The trees were twisted, their bark blackened and charred, as though they too had been corrupted by the same malevolent force that had taken my brother. The photos, the proof, they didn't matter anymore. I had seen enough to understand that the mimics weren't just creatures. They were something else, something far older and more powerful. They were a force of nature. A terrible, insidious force. And now I was on the very edge of it. I had thought the worst was behind me. I had hoped that if I could just reach the summit, maybe, just maybe, I could understand what was happening. Maybe there was something up here that would give me the answers I so desperately needed. But as I stood at the peak, looking down into the vast, smoldering crater, I realized how wrong I was. The air was thick with sulfur. The sky had turned a sickly yellow, the sun's rays barely breaking through the oppressive clouds that hovered over the caldera like a storm about to break. And the ground beneath my boots felt wrong. It didn't feel like the earth I knew. It felt alive. I took a step closer to the edge, my breath catching in my throat. The heat from the crater was unbearable, and yet there was something beneath it all. A presence. It watched me. I could feel it in the air, in the way the wind shifted direction every few seconds, in the way the rocks beneath my feet seemed to vibrate with life. I had been told that volcanoes were capricious, that they could erupt without warning, but this was something else. This was not just nature reacting. This was intent. It was as if the land itself had been corrupted by whatever ancient evil had taken root here, and it was pushing toward eruption as if it had been waiting for this very moment. I stumbled backward, but then I heard it. A whisper. At first I thought it was just the wind. But no, it was too deliberate. Too clear. It was coming from somewhere below. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. The mimics, they were here. And they were waiting. I glanced around, searching for any sign of movement in the haze. But it was the shadows, those damn shadows, that caught my attention first. They shifted just beyond the trees, too fast, too fluid. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what I was seeing. No, not seeing. They were blending. Like the trees and rocks themselves were swallowing them whole. The mimics were here, closer than I had ever felt them before. And worse, they were preparing for something. I could feel it deep in my bones. Something bigger than just their hunt. Something catastrophic. I turned, my eyes desperately scanning the summit for an escape route, for a sign that this could be over, that this could all be a nightmare. But the truth was staring me in the face. There was no escape. Not from the mimics, not from the mountain, not from what was coming. Suddenly the ground shook harder than before. A violent tremor sent me stumbling, my hands scrambling to grab hold of anything. The volcanic earth beneath me cracked open with a deafening roar, a fissure spreading wide as though the very heart of the mountain had been split. The air grew heavier, thick with ash and heat. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Something had a hold on me, some force more powerful than anything I'd ever experienced. I heard the voice again, and this time, it was unmistakable. It was the mimics mimicking the voice of my brother. "Andrew?" It whispered, so soft, so real. "Help me. You can save me. Just reach out. I'm so close. Please come to me." The world spun as I fought the urge to step closer to the edge. The voice was almost too much to bear. It was Bruce's voice, the voice I had missed so desperately. I took a step forward, but then I heard something else. A distant rumble. A low, menacing growl that shook the very sky. It wasn't just the volcano. It was something else. Something alive. I snapped my head around, and through the haze I saw it. A dark, writhing shape in the distance. At first I thought it was smoke, but it wasn't. It was moving. It shifted, swaying in unnatural patterns, too erratic to be a natural wind or ash cloud. I couldn't breathe. I knew what it was. The mimics weren't just trying to mimic human behavior. They were trying to imitate something more. Something older. I had to get out of there. My mind screamed at me to move, to leave before whatever was coming broke free. But it was too late. The ground beneath me cracked open wider. The mountainside shuddered as if the very earth itself were in agony. The air felt thick with something. It was a feeling of wrongness, like every inch of reality was buckling under pressure. And then I saw it. A figure half shrouded in smoke rising from the crater. Its limbs were long, unnaturally thin, like tendrils reaching toward the sky. Its face, if you could even call it that, was a grotesque mess of eyes and mouths, each one contorting into impossible shapes. It was a thing of pure nightmare, something that had been buried for centuries, waiting to emerge. And as it rose, the mimics swarmed. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, crawling up the slopes, slipping from the cracks in the earth, pouring out of the trees. The earth was tearing apart in every direction as they emerged, more horrifying than anything I had ever imagined. They were all around me now, their twisted forms blending in with the shadows, and in the center of it all stood that thing. The volcano was erupting, but it wasn't just molten rock. It was alive, alive with them. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest, but it was no use. The eruption was happening, now. The ground began to quake violently beneath my feet. The trees snapped like matchsticks as the earth tore open around me. The dark clouds in the sky twisted and churned. The very air itself was being sucked into the abyss below. The thing in the crater let out a sound that rattled my bones, a scream so primal, so horrifying, it felt like the end of the world itself. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going anymore. There was no escape, no safety. The mimics were everywhere, their cries echoing through the darkness. The ground shook with every step of the monstrosity emerging from the volcano, and the sky burned with fire. The world was falling apart. The volcano wasn't just a disaster waiting to happen. It was the disaster. And I was too late to stop it. I had no idea where I was running. The ground beneath my feet was a blur of jagged rock, slick with ash, and the sky above had turned an unnatural shade of red, like the world was burning from the inside out. The earth was shaking beneath me, rumbling with every step I took. I could hear the screams, the screeches, of the mimics behind me echoing in the darkness. They were coming. They were always coming. I couldn't feel my breath. It was as if the very air had thickened with terror, pressing in on me from all sides. The ground split wide open with each passing second, and the volcano roared louder, shaking the very heavens. I had to escape. I had to survive. I didn't know how long I had been running, minutes, hours, days. Time had lost all meaning since I had first set foot on this cursed mountain. All that mattered was getting away from the volcano, away from that thing that had risen from the abyss, away from the mimics. They were everywhere now. No longer just shadows in the trees. No, they were crawling out of the very earth itself, their twisted limbs stretching toward me with unnatural speed. I pushed myself harder, forcing my legs to keep moving even as they threatened to give out beneath me. The world was collapsing. The volcano's eruption was imminent, but I knew deep down that it wasn't just the magma that would kill me, it was the creatures. Those horrifying, shape-shifting monsters that had taken my brother and so many others. They were closing in and I could hear their whispers in the air, their mockery of human voices. They knew my every fear, my every weakness. Bruce. The sound of his name, so real, so clear, froze me in my tracks. It wasn't his voice. I knew that now. It was one of them, one of the mimics, imitating the voice of my brother with sickening precision. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. If I did, they would have me. They would take everything. A branch snapped somewhere behind me and I whipped around, eyes wide, expecting to see them. A dozen or more moving through the smoke like predators stalking their prey. The shadows moved unnaturally, twisting and undulating, as if they were part of the very atmosphere itself. I couldn't outrun them. I knew that now. There was nowhere to hide. And then I heard it, the thud of footsteps. Not behind me but ahead. Too fast, too deliberate. My stomach twisted into a knot. They were already there. I turned to run in the other direction, but the earth trembled beneath me once again. The ground was splitting open, the fissures widening, and in one of them, I saw the gleam of something shiny, sharp. Before I could react, something grabbed me. Cold, bony fingers locked around my ankle, pulling me down into the blackened earth. I screamed. A voice, a real voice this time, echoed in my mind, "Don't stop. Don't let them touch you. Don't let them take you." I fought. With every ounce of strength left in me, I kicked and thrashed, trying to pull my leg free. But the creatures weren't just attacking my body. No, they were invading my mind too. Their whispers clawed at the edges of my sanity. I could feel them slithering inside me, sowing seeds of fear, doubt, and despair. My breath came in jagged gasps as I kicked again and again, feeling the sharp, jagged rocks dig into my palms. The pain was nothing compared to what I felt when the first mimic clawed its way to the surface of my skin. It was like ice crawling underneath my flesh, digging its way through my veins. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, parched. And then it came. The pain. The earth split beneath me, and before I could do anything, a flash of sharp claws slashed through the air. I felt the skin on my arm tear open like paper. Blood sprayed, warm and sticky, as something pulled my arm backward, tearing it from my body with a force that sent shockwaves of pain through my chest. I screamed. A primal, guttural scream that echoed through the mountain, but it was drowned out by the eruption of the volcano, by the roar of fire and death that was coming for us all. The ground shuddered beneath me and I felt myself being dragged backward, deeper into the earth. The mimic's cold grip was relentless, and I could feel myself slipping away, losing my grip on reality. No, I won't die here. Not like this. I fought back, using my remaining arm to push against the ground, to claw my way to safety. My head was spinning, my body screaming in agony, but I wasn't dead yet. Not yet. I reached out, grasping for anything that could help me, anything to pull me away from the edge of the abyss. I felt something cold, something hard beneath my fingers. A rock. I wrapped my hand around it and heaved with everything I had left. The mimic's claws loosened, and with one final desperate push, I tore myself free, rolling away from the gaping maw of the earth. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, blood pouring from my severed arm, my vision blurry. The pain was unbearable. My body was broken, but my mind was still sharp. I had to survive. I had to make it out. And then I heard it. The unmistakable screeching. They were coming. The mimics, their voices rising up like a chorus of nightmares, echoing in the ash-filled air. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling toward the cliff that led down the side of the volcano, praying that I could make it before they caught up with me. I took one step, then another, each one sending waves of agony through my body. My vision was dimming. I was losing too much blood. I wasn't going to make it, but I couldn't stop. Not now. I reached the cliff's edge, but the ground shook again and I felt myself falling. I tried to grab hold of the rocks to anchor myself, but it was no use. The earth beneath me crumbled and I was falling into the darkness, into the abyss. Everything went black. I woke to the sound of wind. At first I thought I was dead. My body ached, my mind spun, and I couldn't remember where I was, or how I'd gotten there. The last thing I recalled was falling, tumbling down the side of the volcano, my arm hanging by a thread, my body completely broken. Yet here I was, lying on the cold, uneven ground. My breath came shallow, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of death I had expected. No, the wind was alive with something else, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Where am I? I tried to sit up, but my vision blurred and my head spun with a violent force, forcing me back to the ground. Every inch of my body screamed in pain, but I forced myself to open my eyes, focusing on the dim landscape around me. The sky was a sickly shade of green, the clouds swirling like they were being twisted by some invisible force. The trees stood frozen, their bark blackened, their branches twisted in unnatural angles. The ground itself looked alive, like it was breathing, pulsing with a sickly thrum beneath me. And I knew then. I was somewhere else. Not the same place I'd fallen from, but something far worse, far older. Something that didn't belong in this world. The mimics had found me again. I could feel them before I saw them, their whispers curling around my mind, curling around my soul like tendrils of ice. Their voices were faint at first, almost imperceptible, but as my mind cleared, I understood. They were speaking to me, not with words but with the language of fear. You can't escape. You never could. I forced myself to stand, despite the excruciating pain in my arm, my legs trembling beneath me. The world around me seemed to shift and warp like I was walking through a dream, or worse, through some twisted nightmare where the rules of reality no longer applied. And then I saw them. The mimics. They were standing in the distance, shrouded in the fog, their features barely visible. But I knew what they were. They were no longer just shadows in the trees. No, they had grown stronger, more dangerous. Their bodies shifted like liquid, constantly changing shape, their forms fluctuating with every second, until they were something I could never fully comprehend. Michael. The voice rang out again, unmistakable. I turned toward it, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing amidst the fog, was my brother's face, twisted and broken. His eyes were wide, his lips pulled back in a grin that wasn't his, a grin full of malice and hunger. You can't run from this. You can't outrun the truth. I staggered backward, but the ground was slick and my legs gave way beneath me. I fell to my knees, my arm, my entire body, screaming in pain. The mimics were getting closer now, moving toward me with terrifying speed. Their forms were in constant motion, shifting from one grotesque shape to another. But what chilled me most was the sound of their footsteps, the hollow, echoing noise that seemed to reverberate in my bones. I knew then that I was no longer fighting to survive. I was fighting to keep my mind intact. What do you want from me? I shouted, my voice cracking. But the mimics didn't answer with words. They only stared at me, their empty eyes unblinking, as if they were waiting for something. I crawled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain in my arm and my leg was unbearable, but I couldn't stop. They were getting closer, their movements liquid and unnatural, like predators closing in for the kill. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them take me too. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling as they found the camera. The last thing I had left, my only weapon against the darkness that had claimed my brother. With shaking hands, I lifted the camera to my face, desperate to capture something, anything, that would prove I wasn't insane. I needed to show the world what had happened, to make sure this wasn't forgotten, lost to time like everything else. But the moment I turned the camera toward the mimics, I saw something that stopped me cold. The sky had turned black, the clouds swirling violently as if they were alive. The trees, the very ground beneath me, was twisting and contorting as if something was reaching out from below, something far worse than the mimics. And in that instant I realized the truth. The volcano. The eruption. It had been just the beginning. The true horror wasn't the creatures themselves, but what lay beneath. The volcano was a doorway. A wound in the earth, a crack in the world's fabric, and the mimics, whatever they were, had been feeding on the rift, using it as a passage to enter our world. They weren't just monsters, they were the heralds of something far more ancient, something that had been waiting beneath the surface for centuries. And now they were everywhere. The mimics moved closer, their bodies flickering in and out of shape, like shadows playing tricks on my eyes. I knew I couldn't outrun them. I couldn't fight them. I could only witness what was happening. My body, my soul, was no longer mine. The camera was my only tether to reality, my only hope of showing the world that I had seen it all. As they closed in, I took one last shot. The camera clicked. The flash lit up the darkened landscape for a fraction of a second, illuminating the nightmare that was about to swallow me whole. But just as the light faded, I felt the ground beneath me shift again. It wasn't the earth this time, it was them. Their presence consumed everything, filling every part of me with a sense of finality. The mimics had already begun to change me. The voices of my family, the voice of Michael, they were all merging into one, slowly stripping away my identity, my humanity. And then, as the light from the camera dimmed, I saw it. The fissure in the sky. The tear in reality. A rift, growing wider, pulling everything into it. The mimics were already part of it, their bodies warping, becoming something else. Something older, something deeper, something beyond time. I felt myself falling into the abyss. The camera clicked again. I never made it back. The last thing anyone would ever hear from me were my final photographs. The last image I captured was the one I would never see but the world would. A perfect, terrifying image of everything. The volcano's fury had claimed me. And when the next eruption came, it would consume even more. The mimics weren't just hunting us. They were rewriting the world. And I was now part of the story they were